Hello everybody, I'm Alison Wedgwood, co-founder of eWater Services, and I'll be chairing today's discussion. I founded eWater Services 7 years ago. It operates in 91 villages and towns in Kenya, Tanzania, Gambia and Ghana, all hugely impacted by drought and extreme weather events caused by climate change. And after 30 years of seeing broken water systems in every village, mostly because of a failure to manage or pay for maintenance of the systems, eWater's followed a completely different approach by installing our own smart solar prepayment taps, which allow very low income users to make affordable payments for every litre of water they buy. And we track this through the cloud. And this funds local professional technicians to do all the operation maintenance and really crucially rehabilitation when things break in 2 or 3 years time. So eWater commits to serving the community for a minimum of 10 years and has currently dispensed and tracked 940 million litres of water to 263,000 people. So we're here to discuss the global water challenge, but what exactly is it? The latest statistics show that 1 in 3 people globally lacks access to safe drinking water. Of the global population, nearly half, do not have safely managed sanitation in their home, and about 2.2 billion people, around 29% of the world's population, live in areas that are predicted to experience some level of inundation during a major flood event. And world leaders are getting ready to meet in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt next week. Hopefully even the UK Prime Minister might attend. Egypt is in one of the most water scarce regions on Earth. 12 of the world's 17 most vulnerable countries are located in the Middle East and North Africa. So I think our conversation today will be focused on speakers' expectations of COP27 and what actions can be taken to address and understand the global water challenge. So before we start, a quick note on social media. We really like you to share the event, so please tag at RSK Group and use the hashtag #ActOnESG. And also have a look at RSK on LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. And a bit of housekeeping. All attendees' microphones are automatically muted throughout the webinar, but we'd really like you to get involved and post some questions to this panel. We'll get around to answering as many questions as possible. So please, right now, you can start popping questions in the chat. And shortly after the webinar, we'll give you a link to a short survey. If you could take a couple of minutes to provide some feedback, that really helps us for future webinars. So I'm joined today by 4 eminent experts who will share their thoughts on the global water crisis and what needs to come from COP27. So first up, we have Mark Smith. He's a Strategic Business Development Director for the water sector at RSK Group. Great to have you here, Mark.
Hi Alison. Hi, I hope the technology works now. Hello, hi, good morning.
Hi, Mark.
Really looking forward to this morning's session. So just a few seconds about me. So I joined RSK about 2 years ago, but I've spent the vast majority of my career, the last 30 years, in the water sector. I'm a chemical engineer who I suppose really has spent all of his career in water, wastewater treatment, sludge treatment, and trying to develop those solutions with the clients around the world. I've worked extensively in the UK. I'm based in the UK. I'm talking to you from the UK at the moment. But I have worked overseas in South America, Europe, Southeast Asia a lot as well as the Middle East. And of course the US, I spent a couple of years in the US as well. So the main focus today for me is working with clients to develop, I suppose, implement net zero solutions from very large urban schemes. A lot of people talk about desalination to smaller rural schemes like what you were just mentioning as well, Alison. So yes, really interested, and thanks very much for the opportunity.
Thanks very much for that, Mark. Thanks. Next, we have Dr. Farah Ahmed, Research Fellow at NYU Abu Dhabi Water Research Centre. Hi, Farah.
Hi, Alison. Thank you. It's lovely to be here. I'm associated with the Water Research Center. We're a regional hub for water innovation based in Abu Dhabi, UAE. So we really focus on the technology side of things, and we develop solutions specific to the Gulf region. I've been working on membrane technology for a little bit more than 10 years now, and my own research is about coming up with new materials and modifying processes to bring down the cost of desalination, and water treatment in general, really. And I'm looking forward to today's discussion.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Farah. And next we have Just Barono. He's Research and Development Consultant at Climate Action at Geospatial Research International. I think he's out in Kenya right now. Hi, Jasper. Jasper, I think you might be on mute. Are you able to come off mute? You press the little green.
Yes, sorry for that. Hi from Kenya. My background is in GIS and remote sensing, and for about 12 years now, I've been working in agriculture and climate resilient systems. And for about 2 years now, I diversified into now humanitarian crisis reduction. For the last 2 years, I've been working with the Geospatial Research International as a lead consultant in mapping of water security, and also supporting UNEP as a project liaison officer, supporting them also in capacity as a water expert. Back to you, Alison.
Thanks very much for that, Jasper. And finally, we're joined by Michelle Davitt, International Development Director at Nicholas O'Dwyer.
Thank you, Alison. I'm delighted to be here today. So a little bit about me. I work for Nicholas O'Dwyer Limited, which is a niche engineering consultancy in the water sector, which has been in business now for about 90 years. I originally graduated in civil engineering, and then I did a master's in wastewater treatment. I have about 27 years experience in the water sector, the last 12 of which have been in developing countries, primarily in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, the type of projects I've been working on are typically large municipal projects for either potable water or wastewater treatment, which have been funded by IFI such as the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and so on. And these projects have looked at overall strategies related to water, to the design of sustainable water and wastewater infrastructure, to the actual supervision of the construction of these facilities on the ground. So that's a brief summary, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion today.
Thanks very much for that, Michelle. So yeah, look at the panel. There's a lot of experience, a lot of years, and a lot of countries and regions that we cover. So I think before we go to answering some questions that are coming through now on the chat, we're going to ask a sort of a high-level summary to the panel. I'm going to ask everyone on the panel to answer this. And what exactly is a water crisis? And what does it look like? And we can look at that region by region or sector by sector. So really, what is it about? What is the water crisis, and how is it being impacted by climate change? So first of all, I'd go to Mark, if you'd like to answer.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, thanks, Alison. I think what's really interesting is how the world is waking up to most people will experience climate change through water. And I think, you know, we talk a lot about extreme weather, and usually what we mean is water. It's either floods or droughts, or we talk about glacial melting, which is again is water. And not always, but it's generally, you know, the people on the ground will experience the climate crisis for what it is as a water crisis. And I think we need to talk about a water crisis. I think the other one is a carbon problem, is a water problem. So again, same thing again, we should be talking about a water crisis. And I think unfortunately that hasn't penetrated in the media. I think how we experience that global water crisis, and I don't think anybody, well, most reasonable people would not say that there wasn't a water crisis. So I would say that how we experience the global water crisis is very dependent upon where we live in the world. So this year in Europe, for instance, we've experienced the worst drought in 500 years. I believe the US is 1,000 years. China is the worst drought ever. And yet we've had devastating floods in Pakistan at the same time. So we are beginning to learn, or we will have to learn, about how to experience extremes of drought and flood almost simultaneously. And a lot of it is about managing water. So the last thing I'd like to say is you hear a lot about water scarcity problems, water scarcity issues. Quite often, I would say that is water access problems. So yes, there are parts of the world, and Farah is in a part of the world in the Middle East that has got water scarcity. But quite often the water exists. We know where it is. We just haven't got access to it, and we haven't got safe, clean access to it. So I think overall, my message really would be, let's start talking about a global water crisis, because I think it brings it home a lot more than climate change.
Thanks for that, Mark. Really, really good points. And now I'd like to ask Farah.
So what the water crisis looks like in our region, the UAE, as Mark said, is a very water scarce country. In terms of availability of water, we just don't get enough rainfall. We get like less than 100 millimeters of rain per year. And because the UAE has seen so much urban growth in the last couple of decades, we're very quickly depleting our groundwater reserves, on which we depend for roughly half the country's water supply. At the same time, it's interesting because the consumption habits here don't seem to reflect the gravity of the situation. So we do have one of the highest per capita water consumption rates in the world. It's 50% higher than the global average. Fortunately, the UAE has adopted a somewhat forward-thinking approach and began to explore what we consider unconventional water sources as early as the 70s. But there's still so many challenges, and we still can't say for sure that there will be water for the entire population in the coming years unless we change our course of action.
Thanks for that, Farah. Wow, I didn't realise UAE used 50% more on average. That's an interesting fact. It's very interesting. Right, okay, now let's move on and ask Michelle.
Yeah, well, I suppose from my point of view, a lot of my work has been in sub-Saharan Africa. So we've seen, as Mark said, the kind of wide-ranging climatic changes that have led to floods, very, very serious floods with lots of loss of life and consequent kind of disease outbreaks, to then, let's say, particularly in Eastern Africa, large-scale drought. So water is becoming, with climate change, water is becoming very much harder to manage. The basis by which we tap water in the past has been developed based on data that was collected over decades and decades. And what we're finding now is that our models are not reliable. We're kind of off the charts, as it were, in terms of determining what are safe yields for groundwater, what we can expect to safely abstract from rivers. So this means we need more comprehensive analysis on this kind of upstream work before we start tapping into water resources. And that's something, you know, in our company, that's something that we do spend a lot of time looking at, is how we can kind of adapt to the changing climate and changing water cycles. I would say historically, in sub-Saharan Africa, there's been a large reliance on groundwater, and groundwater is very difficult because you can't see it. So it's under the ground, very difficult to map, and it takes a very high technology solution to determine how the aquifers behave, and in terms of modeling them, where the water flows, and what are sustainable yields based on our current abstractions.
That's really interesting. I think that actually segues really nicely to Jasper and also his experience in Kenya. So Jasper, have you got anything to say on this topic?
Yes, I agree. It's time to actually have a conversation on, it's not just about climate change, it's also time to add water security as an important part of the conversation and part of intervention to some of the needs and livelihoods to the different people. As Michelle is saying, this is one of the worst droughts on almost 70 years right now, and livelihoods are actually completely changed, and for these livelihoods to be reformed and for them to get back to where they are, it will take up to almost 5 years, 6 years in some of the places, in Kenya, Somalia, Ethiopia, which is also worst hit, northern Kenya, really affected. So it's really time to just move the conversation. It's not just about climate change, it's also time to really move into what are the water security actions that need to be taken into place. Back to you.
Thank you very much for that. That's really interesting already. We've got water security, water access, lots of interesting things to talk about. And we've got a couple of questions coming through right now. So I'm following on from that. We've got a question, I think, which follows quite nicely, a bit more focused. So how does climate change impact access to water for low-income communities in developing regions of the world? So this is a bit more focused on developing regions of the world. Jasper, I think we could follow on from that. Have you got anything that you'd like to say about that?
So I think for most of the population out here, considering their level of access and options to actually tap and them to reserve water for themselves, they don't have those options. So really for them, it's really it's their main source of livelihood, and there's no alternative for that. And whenever there is extended drought, uh, like for them now distances for access of water, you have more socioeconomic problems now coming up, women going for longer distances to access some of this water, diseases to access some of when the water quality is reduced, is completely now the populations don't have even access to that healthcare. Some of them, you end up now having more gender-based violence, children dropping out of school. Them actually in this year, in the right in Kenya, almost 100,000 students would not be able to sit for their end of year exams because they have to go out and look for water just for cooking. So it's really bad. And coming back to what the water can do also in terms of providing the correct food for them, you end up having now malnourishment, which in some of the northern counties here in Kenya, if malnourishment is up to 25, 50, 30%, that's a whole county. That means the next adult population would not be able actually to, they're incapacitated in terms of their IQ already is challenged, stunted growth for them. So already, this is really an issue which needs to be addressed already, because stunting in the population affects their potential future human capital also.
Wow, so I'm writing notes down here, so, just but yeah, no, I mean the things you described there are really, really quite horrific and urgent, and it's happening right now in 2022, which is really quite staggering, because a lot of people here have been working in this sector for 20, 30 years, and we were having those conversations in the 1980s and 90s. So having a look, Michelle, would you like to add a few more words on this question?
Yeah, well, I suppose low-income communities rely on groundwater to a large extent, and usually the answer when groundwater, when you need more water, is to pump out more, and what happens is the water tables will go down, which increases the energy needed to get the water out, and also increases the likelihood of a poor quality water. So then again, it comes to a point where this water is no longer drinkable, and this is going to lead to kind of mass migration. I mean, people will leave the land. I mean, historically, Africa has seen incredible urbanization, like urbanization that people in the West couldn't really comprehend. But this was originally for economic reasons, and now we're going to find that this is just for survival. People will need to move to areas where there is water, where there is access to water. So, I mean, I've seen that there's kind of likely to be about 700 million people displaced due to water shortages by 2030, which is a staggering amount of people, and it should be a global concern, So I hope this is something that is really in COP27, that people understand this, that these are the challenges we face. And climate change as well it's increasing seawater levels, and in coastal areas that's going to have a dramatic impact. There's going to be more salinity. The aquifers that people are tapping now are going to be under pressure from intrusion, saltwater intrusion, and that is going to lead to further problems with freshwater supplies. So I mean, this is where technology and looking at aquifer mapping and looking at the impacts of seawater or sea level rise is going to have an effect on communities, and better water management, better integrated water management of the catchments is really urgently needed.
Thanks for that, Michelle. We've got a couple of questions that have come through around salinity, which I think you mentioned. There's a lot of aquifers under pressure, and increasing salinity from groundwater. So I think I'll have a look at a couple here. Is a question: is desalination a solution to the climate crisis and water access problem? Will this help achieve SDG 6, which is the water access SDG? And can it extend supplies beyond what is available? Farah, would you like to have a go answering that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I wish it was straightforward, but yes, desalination is a solution, although it may not be the only solution. So much of our planet is covered with seawater, that seawater essentially is an unlimited raw material for desalination and an opportunity to really narrow the water demand supply gap. This is especially true for water scarce coastal regions. That being said, there are still so many cost and risk factors that make desalination economically and even environmentally expensive. So the cost of desalination, the energy costs associated with it are quite high. Thermal desalination, so there's two kinds of desalination processes. There's thermal desalination and then there's reverse osmosis or membrane-based desalination. Thermal requires a lot more energy, about 15 to 20 kilowatt hours for every cubic meter of water. On the other hand, reverse osmosis consumes a lot less energy, 3 to 5 kilowatt hour per cubic meter. Talking about a plant. But the transition from thermal to membrane has been painfully slow in this region specifically. And I think part of it has to do with the knowledge that's been accumulated over the years in thermal processes, but also because the salinity here is so much higher than the average for seawater. And so that makes it difficult for filters to operate. There's more clogging and it's just more expensive because the salinity is higher, which is why part of what we do is tailor membranes for the region. Another challenge with desalination currently is the brine management. So brine is a byproduct of desalination, and when it's pumped back into the ocean, it can have toxic effects on the growth and reproduction of marine organisms. And this is where we need more innovation in brine management and disposal. In fact, this waste byproduct can be turned into something of value if it's treated properly. So there's so many minerals that can be extracted from desalination brine. So that's an area also that can be considered in terms of research and innovation. So while desalination has the potential to be a viable solution, there's a lot of work needed to bring the costs down and to make it attractive.
Thanks very much for that, for really interesting. I don't know that much about desalination, but I think it is something we're going to get a lot more information about in the future. I've got a hand here. Mark, do you have any thoughts on this?
Schoolboy error, sorry. So yeah, I think desalination has got a really important part to play, but I think unfortunately it's beginning to be seen as a bit of a global panacea. This is the silver bullet. This is the solution. And I think we should remember that desalination is capital intensive. It's expensive. It's urban, and it tends to be working most in large plants. So I think what's suitable for a city in the Gulf is not suitable for a rural community somewhere else. Okay, and I think we should treat desalination as part of the solution, but I think we should also work. I think Michelle mentioned about full management of catchments. We need to work with the water that we have that falls in the regions, and quite often what we find is that access is limited because of pollution. So I think we need to be far more innovative, working with local communities, local treatment, storage and disinfection. So when it rains, capture that rain, treat store that water, take water from the rivers, treat it and store it. We've spent so little on storage, and storage I think can be a very important rural solution. And so also the other one is wetlands. We have destroyed so much of the wetlands around the world, but again, these solutions are low tech, can be operated by communities. Desalination is a high-tech plant, and I think it is in that part of the toolbox, but not the solution for everybody. That would be my caution.
Okay, thanks for that, Mark. Another question sort of on this, well, not quite on this area, looking more across geographies, is currently over $10 billion per year, $10 billion per year is spent on improving water access for unserved communities in sub-Saharan Africa. But 40% of systems still break after 2 years and don't get fixed right now in 2022. So is the water crisis a crisis of operation and maintenance? And as a follow-on question, what does this look like in other regions, including the developed world? Michelle?
Yeah, well, I suppose I've been working in developing large infrastructure, and to my mind, a lot of investment, a lot of capital-intensive investment goes in, but not enough focus is given on the for future operation and so on. And the reality is, let's say in developing countries, that this equipment is very expensive, and the local authorities that run it don't necessarily have the resources to purchase or maintain the equipment. So this is a huge challenge, and this is where I think we need to look at alternative models for infrastructure development in the developing world, where, for example, the private sector can be leveraged to provide, let's say, the operation phase, working with the local authorities in terms of a design, build, operate type model, where maybe there's a 20-year or 10 or 20-year operation included. And then there'll be an incentive for the local investors. I'm talking about local investors getting involved with the local authorities, so that we can get the money that comes from, let's say, IFIs is blended with local finance to deliver a kind of a solution that will work and for the longevity that was originally intended, which in my experience, this tends not to happen. What tends to happen is things break down, and because there's lack of financial resources, the local authorities wait for the next grant aid to come in, which might be 5 years or 10 years away, So this is not really a sustainable way of delivering. Now, in terms of access to water, I mean, I'd agree with Mark there. Like we need to do a lot more about recharging of aquifers for rural areas. So urban areas is fine, but there is the kind of major infrastructure that can be developed. But in rural areas, there needs to be much more focus on getting the groundwater recharge happening. At the moment, with climate change and flash floods, what tends to happen is the water just runs off the land. So there needs to be education in communities as to how to better manage the water in their own environment, so that it goes into the ground and is therefore available in boreholes and so on.
Yeah, thanks for that, Michelle. That's really interesting. Mark, have you got anything further to add?
I think the just picking up on the the $10 billion a year you mentioned, I think the problem with that is quite often that money is project based, and it's not there really for the community. It's there to actually to be able to build the capital, to build the assets, and that's almost always an external body that does that, builds the projects and moves on to the next project. And I think I've seen in South America particularly where a lot of money has been spent to solve problems, and as I said, it breaks down after 2 years, and and then you sort of wonder at times, if you look at over the life of an asset, 25 to 50 years, what benefit has the community got from that other than the extraction of X% on a profit margin over a PFI of 30 years or whatever. So I'm not against it. I think we need to be able to bring technology in, but we need to work very much more with the local communities. I think I'm really passionate about sort of saying to people, here's a solution to your needs. Yeah, this plant will deliver you clean water, and you need to be able to operate this. So they need to become the experts in that plant, and not if something breaks down, we can't get a pump because the pump was made in Europe and it's not accessible 2 years later. So I think people are very innovative if we work with them. If we do a solution to them, quite often they don't look at it as their solution, and it's left afterwards. So again, it's hearts and minds. I think it's fairly obvious stuff, but we've made the same mistakes for 30, 40 years, as you said, Alison, yourself.
Well, haven't the last 30 years been about working with the community? Hasn't that been all the NGOs talk about? Yes,
they do. And then when you look at some of the big capital schemes, they're done to the community. And then there's a governance imposed, and I think there's people talk a lot about financial returns, but where did the benefits go? And what I'm saying is that needs to be very, 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 very much brought through the community, so that the community wants it and agrees with that solution. I mean, yes, we talk about working with the community, but it's working with the solution that we've imposed quite often.
So the demand responsive approach, I think it was a methodology that was talked about in the 90s about working with the community. Okay. So let's move on. We've got some sort of slightly different questions now about over the last few months, we've seen devastating floods in Pakistan and drought across East Africa. Have we left these impacts unchecked for too long? Jasper, have you got anything to add on this question?
Have we left them unchecked for too long? I think they've stayed too long in the boardrooms. A lot of them also staying in concepts and very little on implementation, which we, in my thinking, it's really time to move away from the contingencies, the disaster plans, to actually now implement and support now the governments actually to how to create now decision-making support systems which are evidenced on where are these vulnerable areas, what are the thresholds, and what are the investments which need to be attached way before the disaster actually happens, which everything still comes back to planning. How much water is needed for the households, how much water is needed for the livestock. A lot of that actually needs now to be assessed and put into perspective.
Thanks very much, Jasper. Farah?
Yeah, I'd like to add to that actually. So floods in Pakistan specifically, Pakistan contributes to less than 1% of global emissions, but it has the largest number of glaciers outside the poles, which are now melting rapidly, and that's kind of one of the reasons why we're seeing these severe floods. And this really just reiterates the need for global solutions that take into account that certain countries are paying more of a price. Some countries are maybe left behind, so how do we prevent that?
Yeah, really interesting. Thanks for that. And Michelle?
Yeah, well, I mean, from my point of view, it's it's kind of a wake-up call, I think, for the developed world as well. I mean, the developed world, like Mark said, has seen the biggest impacts of climate change in terms of water this year. So I'm hoping that the politicians at COP27 will stand up and take notice. In terms of sub-Saharan Africa, only 4% of greenhouse emissions come from sub-Saharan Africa, and yet there's millions and millions of people affected by this, and they're not contributing, but they are affected, very severely affected. So I think, yeah, I mean, that's the kind of the main thing for me really is that the developed world, takes note, comes up with innovation. We need innovation in financing in terms of climate adaptation and mitigation in the developing world. And we also need innovation in terms of technologies, so it's very important that these solutions are done quickly. We don't really have time. I mean, there's a 50-50 chance now that we are going to exceed the 1.5 degree limit that we had all hoped for. And really, it's time for the politicians to be bold and be brave.
Great. I think we can all agree on it's time for the politicians to be brave and bold. Thanks for that. Right, we've got 10 minutes left, so I think we've got time for a couple more questions. So question here, it's sort of linked to this. Let's imagine that we can see an increase in finance to support water programs at COP27. What do you think can be done to ensure this is spent effectively and delivers lasting impact, apart from doing it quickly, I think is one message. Mark, have you got anything to say about this?
Yeah, I think they do it quickly is the obvious statement, I think. But I think another thing we need to remember, something I say quite a lot, is that water is heavy. It is not like electricity. It's not easy to ping it down a wire. So, a cubic meter of water weighs a ton. So every time you pump it, it costs money. And with the energy costs going up, that must drive local solutions. So again, I'm sort of banging on here about sort of localism, local solutions, working with the communities. I think that we need to realise that the solutions to water are not. It's not rocket science. We have all the solutions. We need to be able to tie them up. Michelle has talked about innovation and governance and financing. We don't need to invent a new pump. We don't need to invent a new way, but we need to realize that it's all water. The polluted stuff in the river is the same stuff that you drink. We just got to clean it, and we're able to manage it in that water cycle that nature does very well, and that somehow we've stopped thinking that the polluted water is the same stuff in our glass.
Yeah, right. I think because time's running short, I'm going to move. I think go on to a last question that we can ask everybody. It's the last question. It's like, is it going to be a positive, upbeat one? I'm not sure. But the climate crisis came to Europe this summer. I think, Michelle, that we've commented about this. And so the question is about, what do all the panel think COP27 could do to solve the problems of the global water crisis? Are there really any technical, social, political, or financial solutions that can practically work? So I'm going to finish on this one and go around all the panel, if that's okay. Farah, would you like to kick this one off?
Yeah, so I'll keep it short, but I think what we need to keep in mind is that we want to keep continuing to meet growing water demand while keeping carbon emissions in check. So we know that the demand for water is only going up. So this requires decarbonization of many of the industries that provide water, one of them being desalination, with respect to which I'd say that we want to move towards clean energy desalination and explore newer technologies that are feasible for specific regions. That's all.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that. And Jasper, yeah, we've still got 6 minutes left. So if people want to talk a couple of minutes each, that's fine. Jasper?
I think for this COP, what I hope to see more is a push towards discussing more, not just about climate, but also multi-sectoral approach and push towards water-based initiatives, more water, wash resilient initiatives, nature-based solutions, how those can be financed, and actually now start to financing some of the adaptation commitments that have been made.
Thanks, Jasper. I'm not, who can ask next? Michelle, have you got anything to contribute?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, like I said, I'd like to see the politicians really face the science, you know, move away from the politics and face the science. Like it's a climate crisis and it's a water crisis. It's going to impact all of us in one way or another. I mean, from my point of view in the infrastructure space, I mean, what I'd like to see is carbon accounting brought into all infrastructure work, you know, so that there is a focus on providing the most sustainable solutions as opposed to the least costly ones. I mean, in my experience, there's still a focus on the cost of everything, but the green premium is ignored, and this green premium needs to be covered, to my mind, by developing countries. Developed countries. Developed countries are the ones who contributed the most to carbon emissions, and I think they should cover the cost of the green premium for developing economies as grant aid, so that developing economies can deliver infrastructure that's net carbon zero, but that they're not paying the price for that, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and you talked about carbon accounting, just for people not listening in. What does carbon accounting actually mean?
Well, I suppose you know, water. There's two sides to sustainable water. So one is the availability of the water, that you're not taking out too much volume of water from the environment that you're taking it from. And in an ideal world, you take out that volume, you'd use it, you drink it, and then you treat it, and you would release it back to where you got it from. That's what, like Mark was talking about, local water, and that's a sustainable model. But then there's the other side of water. So when we take water, to take it out of the rivers or out of the ground, there's an energy impact on that. So there's an energy cost, and there's an energy cost in treating the water to make it drinkable. There's an energy cost in treating the water to make it safe to release. So that energy that's used to make it drinkable or to make it safe to release, that energy has to come from renewable sources to be net zero. It can't just be from burning fossil fuels, you know. And this is where carbon accounting comes into it, so that when you get a cubic meter of water, you also have a carbon associated with that cubic meter of water, that you know that this is water that's going to be net zero in terms of carbon emissions.
Does that mean a lot more use of solar as well, solar pumping and solar to get the energy?
Well, solar, wind, hydrogen, green hydrogen. I mean, I was delighted to see that the EU have announced a program to increase the green hydrogen production significantly from 2021. But I was most disappointed that it took a conflict for the EU to realise that this was a good idea. You know, this should have happened. These increases should have happened back in 2021, regardless. But it's the conflict and the lack of natural gas that has forced them into it. Well, what I'd like to see is that they make the bold decision, say, this is a problem, this is a crisis, we need to be bold, we need to make these decisions now. Obviously, they could have made the decision, but they decided to long finger it. So now is the time, and COP27 is the time to actually make things happen.
Yeah, okay, brilliant, thanks. And finally, Mark, what do you got to say on this?
Yeah, I think I just sort of, I would agree with everything that the panelists have just said. I think, you know, but rather than looking backwards and complaining about what should have happened, you know, looking forward, I think at COP27, we need to develop radical solutions and implement these solutions immediately. If we have to accept the fact that we are where we are, I would say that the climate crisis should be reframed as a water crisis, and water is a precious resource. We know that, we can agree on that. But there's plenty of water for everyone on the planet. So really, what we're talking about is, you know, to combat the challenges, the problem needs to be reframed more as a water access problem than a water stress problem, and that's obviously geographically sensitive. But I think access to clean water is a growing global problem, and I'm really interested in sort of listening and hearing that solutions must be local. You know, they really have to be, and that locality, that water access solutions. Some of them can be as simple as water pump maintenance, or, you know, fixing the local infrastructure, or it can be as complex as needing to design and build a whole treatment plant and desalination plant. And I think the work that's going on moving from thermal to membrane, you know, that Farah was talking about is really interesting. But that has to come with an entire urban distribution system as well. So I think there are issues there. What we need is answers, and what we need is, I think, leadership. But the one thing I would plead for is, I think Michelle touched on it, is we have to have a willingness to share the payment burden worldwide. You know, if Pakistan is emitting 1% of the greenhouse gases and yet getting hit with these massive floods for a global problem, it's not really up to them to fix it so financially. We have to all share that burden. So I would say what COP27 must deliver is leadership and collaboration, but actually action rather than words. I think we've had lots of words. I think we now need to start moving into action.
Thanks very much for that. Wow, it's good timing because we're dead on our 45 minutes. Thank you so much for that, everybody. It's lots of really insightful points, and I'm feeling quite worried. We all should be worried. I think that is the message. We should be worried, and we need to stop talking, and there should be some proper action on this. So I'd like to thank you all for contributing to this panel, and we'll all be keeping an eye on COP27, seeing how water is raised at the summit. You can tune into a recording of our session later on the RSK website, and please do share on social media using the hashtag #ActOnESG. So thank you all very much for your contributions, and I hope you've enjoyed it.
Thank you, Alison.